We've seen how many dreams women have, that women readers and women writers have. We've also seen that many of them continue to be just that, dreams. But many of their dreams have traveled. And this is a fact that gives you and me reason to hope that we will all continue to have dreams, and all our dreams will travel to better places, not just in our stories, but also in our lives. Thank you.
That's very interesting, intricate account of women's travel, writing, and dreams. Alice Walker once wrote an article called "In Search of Our Mother's Gardens," and that indeed was an account that would detail and that would talk in personal terms and in experiential terms about women's struggle, women's movements, women's examples that would talk a lot more about certain life realities and possibilities of transgressing, subverting those realities. And that's been a map of women's lives and activism, which often goes unmapped in our historiographical exercises. Thank you very much for that very wonderful session. Now we are opening up the floor for discussions. So should we collect questions or should we answer them one after the other?
The questions need not be literary. I want to hear about some of the dreams and the questions that young people have in the audience.
So we'll respond to one after the other, and we'll see how it's going. If it doesn't work, then we'll collect questions. One knows from feminist activism that there are a lot of such very, very important women. I mean, women's writing in India, Susita and Lilita's work. But what one doesn't see is these are not becoming part of the regular textbooks, and many of the textbooks in school and college continue to be quite traditional, conservative, and if I might, and patriarchal, in almost every way. Well, there seems to be a gap between the educational enterprise and the women's movement, and I mean, it's definitely a problem with the educational establishment, but how does one address these concerns?
I think three sorts of things can be done. You know, the classroom is a slow place. Schools and colleges take a while to get the news of what's happening in the world around them. When I was a young woman studying in Bombay, you could have been forgiven for thinking that the only people who wrote literature, the only people who wrote poetry and novels and essays were white men from England, this little island from this whole big world. And it was only out of sheer curiosity going down from that, the college was on a hill, going down that college lane and finding other things to read, that I even realized not just that there were writers from Russia and writers from Japan and writers from France, but that I discovered that there are writers from India. So you had to actually, unless you had these writers in your home, unless you are lucky to be born into a family where there are books at home, you had to go and find it yourself. So this is one way in which once you have found out, you will come to the classroom and ask about these people. Just as you have heard about some of these women today, you can go and ask, who is this woman? Who is this writer? Somehow bring that person into the classroom. That is one. The second thing is that when you start teaching, when you start writing your papers or your thesis, you start writing about these people, so that the classroom and the school system will say, oh, where are the textbooks? What can we teach with? So you produce that. And finally, of course, change does happen Now we don't just study the literature of white men from England when you study literature in India. Similarly, we hope that women's work will also become part of the whole. I feel very strongly that we shouldn't have a separate gender, as if to say, Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays from 9 to 10 in the morning, we are going to learn all about women, or gender justice, or gender sensitization. I'm sorry, half the world lives day in and day out as women. So you cannot reduce them to one part of the timetable. So the gender aspect must come into every form of study. In the young friends I met from BCom, your classroom should address what does it mean for a woman to be a businesswoman? What does it mean for her to go and take a loan to get credit? That is important too. What is it, because some of the success stories of the world about credit programs, loan programs, has been when they give women a chance to do that, they will do it for the whole family. What does all that mean? So that's there. When you're studying history, when you're studying sociology, so it's not just literature. It's not, dreams are not just something that happen at night in the privacy of your bed. So I think that one way in which we can actually sensitize is to sensitize teacher, student, the textbook, the whole system, by introducing it into every class.
Okay. I've got a Malayalam question which I think I'll have to translate. Okay. Is there a need for the banner, Penneluthu is the word that they've used, which translates into women's writing? There is nothing called men writing, so why do we have to have women writing? This is from somebody called Bhagyashri. So that's the first question. The second question is...
May I just, because I'm getting old, I have short-term memory loss. That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. Why do we have this? I have just finished saying that we shouldn't have an artificial separate thing called gender sensitization. It should be sensitization to the world in which we live, in which some people have power and some don't, and it should be there everywhere. In which case, then why do we talk about women's writing? Two things. Think of a newspaper article and think of a library or a classroom. These are two different places. Now, in a newspaper, you might have somebody saying, oh, we haven't had anything on women for a while, let's have something on women writers. Now what happens? I'm not blaming journalists, but you might have all kinds of women writers, somebody who's writing some pulp fiction, and you might have Shobha De and Mahashweta together as women writers. So these are just writers who happen to be women. And we know in India that just because you have a woman writer doesn't mean she's going to tell you anything useful about women reading and writing. We've had a prime minister who's a woman. She didn't do anything in particular for women. So these are, in the journalistic world, it is possible to say, okay, so they will ask me, how do you feel as a woman writer? How do you write? So once as a joke, I said, I cut onions with my left hand while I'm writing with my right hand. I mean, you're joking because they're making it out into some sort of ghetto. It's very convenient. So all of us are writers and you people are women writers. So if you write anything about anything other than women, They say, please stick to your own little topics, don't come and do this. Okay, that is when women's writing is seen as a ghetto. But in a classroom or within the books, the covers of a serious book, when you are talking about the history of literature, when you are trying to understand why people write in a particular way and what they are saying, it is very important. If you have 2 children in your class, one child who comes from a family which has been educated for the last 500 years, and another child whose family has been educated for the last 10 years, will you read the 2 essays in the same way? Will you just say they are student writing? It might be literally true, it might do for the newspaper, but it will not do for an intelligent analysis. You have to take into account what this is saying. And that is why we have courses such as women's writing, we have courses such as Dalit writing, and we even have sub-courses, Muslim women's writing, or whatever, African American writing. That's the use of it in a classroom, to understand the context in which they were writing. After all, if you go, we are saying this here, but you know, power spheres are different in different places. If I'm sitting in Germany or France, and they say Indian writing, but theirs is just writing, then we get angry and say, why are you calling it Indian writing? We are also just writers. Because that is the context for them. And for us, we understand this as a power context. We are the other to them.
Ma'am, could you please clear what's the difference between a feminist and a womanist?
You know, the thing about labels is that you can go out of this hall and invent a new one yourself. I have no idea, and I don't even know why you should use womanist. We were having enough trouble, I thought, with humanist and feminist. I think labels can be useful. You also need to ask somebody. If somebody says, oh, I'm a feminist, you need to ask, please tell me what you mean by that, so that I know that we're talking about the same thing. What we, I think, really need to be interested in is 2 things. One is that if your work, your personal life, your life choices are guided by, not dictated by, sadly. You can be the world's most outspoken feminist, and yet you have the same problems because we all grew up with the same prejudices about not just others, but about what we are capable of. So, feminism is there in theory. There are arguments, all of which you should read, but I'm interested today, this morning, in lived feminism, in which case it is a day-to-day learning. Just like it took me a long time, it took me at least 20 years to confess in public that I'm a writer, because I thought, well, you know, maybe it's an illusion on my part. So you earn the title writer. Similarly, you earn the title feminist because you continue on a daily basis to act, to make choices as if there is equality between men and women regardless of where they come from. So I think that is what I would say. And the other thing I think is that in our lives, again, lived lives as well as work, whatever we do should benefit from the great ideas of our time. Whether you agree with it or not is not the point. And some of the great ideas of our time have included what Freud said, that there is an unconscious dictating to us, influencing us. There's Marx, who said you can work for an equal society, and feminism, which says that there is such a possibility of men and women being equal.
Ma'am, Do you think there is a powerful parallel writing of women in the mainstream, Indian mainstream of women writing in literature?
You know, the world of writing is subject to something which we are all subject to, whether you run a school or you write or whatever. And what is that? Money, the marketplace. So the world of writing has many worlds in it. So we might like to romanticize and think of the writer sitting, you know, somewhere and coming up only with wonderful ideas and stories and dreams, but there's also the real world. So women's writing, if you were to look at what is women's writing today in India, the marketplace has given risen to many types of women's writing. Sometimes women's writing have even been written by men. And next door in Tamil Nadu, you know, that is a tradition. Many of the stories written for women's magazines, it's only when I grew up that I realized that Sujata is actually a man with a woman's name. So women's writing is a complicated business. You have women's writing, which is for, you know, Femina and Ananda Vigadan and pulp fiction. You have what is now being called chick lit, which is a kind of, what shall I say, a quick, popular money earner, which is not to say it need be bad writing, it is just superficial writing. So there is that kind of thing. Then you might have women writing in a language where, one of the languages of India, where there has not been a strong movement there of women writing. There might be women's movements, women might have been part of peasant movements, workers' movements, but there isn't a strong tradition of people talking about consciousness, political consciousness. So if you look at women's writing in the different languages of India, you will find actually that they are all at different points of development. So some have already become mainstream. Malayalam, of course, is one of the forerunners, as it always is. We have always to look at what is being written in Malayalam and Bangla to feel proud that you're an Indian. So they are very much at the forefront. But in some of the other Indian languages, you'll find they're still talking about, oh, women don't want to be devis and all that, whereas you're talking about something different. So don't ever think, just as it's impossible to say Indian writing, that you have to say Indian literatures in the plural. Similarly, it's very hard to say women's literature in India. You have to say women's literatures.
Ma'am, what makes women suppress always, even if we women and men are having equal rights, women is always getting more suppressed, right? What will be the reason for that?
You know, there are some things, my dear, that, you know, there are many answers to that. I have to come back and do a course. You could argue, as has been argued, that the biological difference makes women more vulnerable, that their bodies are weaker and more vulnerable. That is one argument. But you imagine like those Hindi movies where, you know, two people come out of somebody's head and they're having an argument. The other person could say, but women reproduce. They actually do the most important, the hardest job in society. And if it's a pity that men can't have a chance at bearing a child, and they know exactly how strong you have to be to do that. So that is that argument. So biological doesn't really work 100%. Okay? There is something to be taken there, but doesn't work 100%. But you also have societies in history, in the world, where women have not been weak, have not been told they're weak, who have not acted as if they are weak. So clearly it has something to do, a lot of it has something to do with the way a society raises its children and tells them what to believe in. The belief system, not just men saying, sit here. These are loving men. These are fathers who love us, husbands who love us. But men out of love for you telling you, careful, you are weak. I will take care of you. And not just men telling you that, but women telling you that. The first person in any woman's life who tells you, you are weak, be careful, your body is vulnerable, is your mother. So you know, of course, that when one group wants to rule, even if they're beloved rulers, they will use something called an instrument. Now, we don't love the police, but we love our mothers. So when the instruments are people who not only love us and whom we love, but who are our first teachers, who are our first authorities of the world, what the world should be, you have the answer. It's a complicated answer.
Friends, sorry, I was too loud. Huh? Okay, I was looking at the whole scenario. We have a very creative writer here. I am talking to you. Huh? And there is the word dream, women's dream. Let us talk about girls' dream, because so many of you, 99% of you are girls here. Girls' dream. And also look at, remember this 2013, your motto is gender justice, a year for putting all these together. Can we listen to 2 or 3 girls coming forward and saying, I have a dream. I have a dream. One. Can we have a few other people to say, I have a dream. Listen to me a little more. I have a dream about a different family. I have a dream about a different religion. I have a dream about a different society. I have a dream about a different politics. Please come forward. 1, 2,